This is cool. I was last at NDC Security in 2020. And I came to NDC Security in 2020, so it was Jan 2020. And then we went to London, and I was like, oh, I'll just come back next year, and we'll keep doing this. And then things got kind of weird for a while. So yeah, it's really cool to be back in Norway and doing NDC Security again and being able to do it in person. Now, fortunately, over the last 4 years, we have solved the security problems, so there's not a lot to talk about today, except for the hundreds of other data breaches I think I've added since then into Have I Been Pwned. Now, who's used Have I Been Pwned before? Who's been in LinkedIn data breach? Dropbox data breach? Ashley Madison data breach? Come on. But that's the right answer. It's like, Ashley, what? And look, a lot of this talk is going to be around some of these like weirder data breaches that we see happen, because data breaches sort of have this way of peeling back the veneer of a website, and you get to see all the mechanics and interesting things underneath. And some of them are a little bit salacious, some of them are a little bit weird. I'm going to give you a whole bunch of different examples of strange things that I've seen since I started it way back here. So we just had the 10th anniversary of Have I Been Pwned, which surprises me more than anyone, because it's like a massive repository of data which is there as a result of people, for the most part, breaching systems. There's a whole other discussion around a whole bunch of data that's been scraped from different places as well lately. But for the most part, this is data that's been obtained due to people going in and compromising all the sorts of vulnerabilities that you've probably been learning about in workshops the last couple of days, and you hear about today and tomorrow. Now, when I started it, not everyone thought it was going to be a legit thing. And I always thought this was funny. Like, this guy was, oh, maybe we're just putting a big text box there and you put your email address in there and I harvest email addresses and then I can, I don't know, like send you spam. But when it started, it had 154 million records in it anyway, mostly from the Adobe data breach and then a few other little ones. And then as time's gone by, we're now at 700 plus different incidents from all sorts of different walks of life. I mean, you ever hear people say, like, if you can imagine it is on the internet, there is a forum or there is a community, there is a group of people that are into the most wild things that you can ever think of, and all of the mainstream stuff. And every single one of these sites, sooner or later, has some sort of a security incident. Now, it's kind of a, I guess, a weird job to have. And probably for many of you, if you're in this industry and you meet up with people, like non-techie people, and you try and explain what you do, what do you tell people? Like, what do you say? What's your job? Any suggestions? What do you say, Scott? Cyber. Right, this is what I normally say. People go, oh, what do you do? You know, it's like, I'm a dentist or something like this, and then someone else is a mechanic. What do you do? Cyber. And they just say, okay. And then you move on, because it's a kind of weird thing. But very often, we'll go and meet up with some friends and have some dinner and have some drinks, and they'll go, you know, what do you do? Cyber. And then my wife, Charlotte, she'll go, tell them the story about the blindfold and the socks. So, okay, all right. Because we're trying to explain these weird things we see in this industry. So, I get a lot of emails from people who are in data breaches and they want to know what to do. Now, Ashley Madison was a perfect example because it was such an impactful event. There were more than 30 million people in that data breach. And a huge number of those people end up having really severe impacts on their life. Destroyed relationships, destroyed lives. People committed suicide as a result of the Ashley Madison data breach. Now, when it happened, I made this decision to start flagging some data breaches as sensitive. And the idea of a sensitive data breach is you can't just put an email address in the website and get an immediate result. You have to get an email to that address, prove you control it, and then you see the results. And I guess sort of my moral compass there was, if the website is likely to have an impact on someone in a negative way by association to it, that's the point to be sensitive. There's a whole other long blog post about why everything's not sensitive. Everything from the way support services run to the way the API runs. But the sensitive stuff, all of that is not publicly searchable. Now, before Ashley Madison, there was another data breach called Adult Friend Finder. Friend has a very special meaning in this context, very close friends. And they had about 4 million records breached earlier on in 2015. Ashley Madison happened in August. And then the next year, in 2016, they had about 170 million records breached. So it was a massive incident. And everything went in there as sensitive. But then every now and then, I get emails like this. This person says, what would you charge to check email addresses against the cheater website, Adult Friend Finder? So they're wanting me to circumvent the deliberate controls in order to check someone else's email address and figure out if this person was on the website. Now, why would you want to do that? The mind boggles. But anyway, they explained why. They said, the long story short is I found photos that look like my wife, but the lady's wearing blindfold, so hard for me to ID 110%. Okay. And then, I assume it's him, goes on, and he says, but I did find matching socks from the image, but that only gets me to maybe 70% and not something like 90% on certainty. And I'm sort of... You don't need a data breach expert, you need a marriage counsellor. This is a separate issue. But it's fascinating to see the sorts of impacts these data breaches have on people's lives and then the sorts of requests that get sent to me. So, Have I Been Pwned is one of, I guess, ultimately many different places where data does get indexed and become searchable. Now, I think the fact that it's been going for 10 years and it's used by governments and law enforcement agencies around the world means that we must be doing something right. Other websites, not so much. So this is WeLeakInfo. And the idea of WeLeakInfo is they've taken inspiration from somewhere about having a great big search box where you enter something like an email address and you click search and then you get results. Now, Have I Been Pwned literally just answers that question. So have I been pwned? Have I been seen in a data breach? And it will say, for example, yes, you're in the Adobe data breach. It won't say, here's your Adobe password. If you're in, let's say, the LinkedIn data breach, they stored their passwords as SHA-1 hashes. It won't say, here's your SHA-1 hash. It will just say, yes, you're in the incident. Services like this were like, yes, you're in the incident, here's all the data. Except there was another step first, you had to pay. So you had to pay to buy the data. So their modus operandi was search for email addresses, get results, pay money, and then you get to see all of the data. And I'd have people using services like this, buying the data and then sending me my data. Here's your name, your date of birth, a whole bunch of really terrible passwords I'd used in the past, because we all have a history. And now this is what it looks like. So, didn't work out great for them. And incidentally, you'll see a theme here. Every time you see the word leak in one of these services, it's usually a nefarious website. They're usually not just providing this data for people, but also advertising on hacking forums, and clearly their intention is to disadvantage people. Another one shortly after was leaked source. And leaked source was really, really popular till it met an end. We'll see the end in a moment. Till it met an end in 2017. And I always found it really fascinating because there'd be data breaches that would appear there before they were on the public hacking forums, before they were socialised in other locations, before they were talked about anywhere. And I always wondered, why do we keep seeing data breaches here before we see them anywhere else? Now, I'm only speculating, but my guess is that they were paying people to go and find vulnerabilities and take data and put it on here because then they could sell the data. One of the things you'll notice with every single one of these sites is anonymity. Not anonymity for you as the person searching, but anonymity for the operators of the site. If you go to Have I Been Pwned, there's a great big link with my photo on there and all the links, you'll figure out who it is very easily. You go to sites like this, it's very hard to figure out who's behind it. And that's intentional. And it's probably pretty obvious, right? Because they don't want to be found because they're literally selling identity data. However, we did find out who ran this one. It was this guy. It's a guy called Jordan Bloom. He's a Canadian. And he ran this service up until the FBI and friends caught up with him in 2017. And they'd found he'd made quite a lot of money from selling your date of birth, your address, your phone number, other things like that, largely on criminal forums. But what I found quite fascinating with this guy is he's trying to be anonymous, right? And he's trading in stolen identity data, and whilst he's trying to be discreet, he's driving around in a bright green Lamborghini. Now, don't get me wrong, I like the car, but if you're trying to fly under the radar, maybe, I don't know, a price, something like that. But it is quite interesting when, you know how there's a big peanut gallery on the internet? Yeah, anyone still on Twitter? Tanya. Some of us are still there. Everyone's got an opinion. There's lots of thoughts about what's right, what's wrong, what's privacy, what's not. And time again, people say to me, they're like, you wait till the FBI finds out what you're doing. You're going to be in trouble. It's like, really? I was like, yeah. Once they find out where you are, they're going to come get you. So, well, they know where I am. That's where they delivered this to. and literally, they came around. Charlotte was there as well. Came around. We had dinner, drinks. We went wakeboarding. It's a true story. We had great fun with the FBI. Really nice people. I use that term very collectively, but so far every experience has been really positive. And I think the interesting thing about the data breaches is that there is, largely as a result of criminal activity, and then there are bad things that can be done with it, and there are good things that can be done with it. And the reason I got this from the FBI is that one of the incidents that happened, and we're going to talk about this a bit later on, Genesis Market, after there was this incident that was malware on machines, compromised a whole bunch of credentials, they said, look, we want to let people know. How do we let people know that their credentials have been compromised? We can't send them emails. Can you imagine that? You get an email that says, hi, we're the FBI, your password has been taken. That does look a bit suspicious. So they fed the data into Have I Been Pwned. And whether it's the FBI or here in Norway, the Norwegian government uses Have I Been Pwned, a public position on that. Everything from police departments to libraries to things like that are using this service to try and do good things after bad things happen. Now, on the subject of data breaches of all sorts of different walks of life, brings us this one. Now, a few years ago, it's a breach of a website called Fur Affinity. Does anyone know what Fur Affinity is? One person. Does anyone know what a furry is? A few more people. Now, I honestly, in my ignorance, I didn't know. So there was a data breach for a website, and for me, most of it is just mechanical, right? There's a breach, there's some data that's been taken, now I have to process it. And then I learned more about the nature of the service. And I found a little bit of a clip that explains what a furry is because it puts it in a bit more context.
I'm a 24-year-old adult, and my hobby is dressing up as a blue cat on weekends. I wanted to be able to actually wear, from head to toe, look exactly like I do sort of in my head.
Courtney is a furry.
Right, so I wasn't aware of this, and I needed to find some imagery to try and represent the furry and represent the data breach as well. I've been digging a lot of stuff out of DALL-E lately. Anyone tried DALL-E? You must have. So anyway, I said, give me a whole bunch of furries who've been breached. And I love the expression. I think DALL-E did a really good job of this. But there was a data breach of Fur Affinity, and it impacted 1.2 million email addresses and hashed passwords. Now that's a really substantial number of people. And the thing about it is that that's 1.2 million people who very likely wanted to have their association, not just to this website, but any website. I think by default we expect to have our association to any website being something that's personal and private. And then we have this data breach and suddenly everything is out there in the public. And I went, okay, someone sent me the data, I'll load it into Have I Been Pwned. And the person that sent it said, you have to flag this as sensitive, right? I was like, well, why? It's people that dress up in costumes, well, that's fine. So yeah, but there is a sensitive social stigma to it. You have to make sure that this isn't publicly discoverable. And there's a second part of this clip which I think explains this really well.
While Courtney feels comfortable in fur, most people would find this behavior bizarre.
Furries can be considered greatly taboo because we look at people dressing up in furry costumes as being child's play, and it's something that should have been left in the past and not brought into adulthood.
And again, that's something that I didn't initially understand, and as I've gone through these data breaches, there's been more and more sites, and particularly more and more communities that are not communities that I normally socialise in, where you sort of see them in a different light. You're like, okay, well this is actually something that's very personal. And particularly things like hashed passwords. You know, most of the time when it's hashed passwords, it's like SHA-1 or MD5 or something terrible. So not only do we have the association of people to the service, but we have the credentials that, because people are normal humans, they've reused all over the place. So a compromise of a service like this inevitably leads to a compromise of all sorts of other different websites that people frequent. Now, when these data breaches happen, they get socialized really, really broadly, really, really quickly, often through websites like this. So this was Breach Forums. And Breach Forums is a clear web forum. And I really want to emphasize that point. It's a clear web forum. All the time we see press about there's been a data breach and the data's now on the dark web. And it sounds scary, doesn't it? You know, like the dark web, it sounds bad. And I'll have these chats with journalists because often they'll call up and say, hey, you know, there's something in the news, you have a comment on this, you know, it's on the dark web, that's bad, is it? It's like, no, it's worse. What's worse than the dark web is the clear web. Because this is a normal browser putting in the URL and you go there and there's just troves and troves and troves of data breaches and personal data. And it's crazy because these services run for years in the clear web, easily identifiable with lots of people registering, signing up to them. Think about how forum software normally runs. Collects your email address, collects your IP address, and stores it all in a nice little, I was going to say honeypot, sometimes it is a little honeypot, a nice little repository where eventually law enforcement come along and snag it. So this was Breach Forums. And Breach Forums was run by this guy, Pwned. This was his little Hello Kitty avatar that he ran by. And it ran for quite some time with people posting anything from freely accessible downloadable data through to data that they were selling, through to selling exploits, through to selling credit card data, through to selling malware, like whatever. It was just a forum for everything. Now, what tends to happen with these forums is they're run by people who try very, very hard to be anonymous. They think they're invincible, and then we work out who they are. So this is Connor Fitzpatrick. And he's the guy who ran Breach Forums. He's Pwned in the previous slide. And he got caught earlier last year by the FBI and friends. And I keep saying FBI and friends because see all those takedown notices? It's not just the FBI. You often see the National Crime Authority in the UK, you often see the Australian Federal Police, the Dutch are very, very prominent as well. So these law enforcement agencies work together really closely on incidents like this. Now, what's really fascinating is that a few different things. So first of all, he's 20 years old here. So by the time he got caught, he was 20. So he'd been doing this for years. Most of these people are starting as children. So the kids, often 14, 15, same age as my son here, they start doing this sort of thing and they get away with it for years and then the law catches up with them. Now, you know how when we were kids we all thought we were invincible, right? Well, we're all still here, so maybe we were right. But you think you can get away with anything. And that's often the attitude they have as well, but they make stupid mistakes time and time and time again. And if you've ever read stories about things like how they caught Dread Pirate Roberts from Silk Road, you know, there were dumb mistakes that were made, and there's usually a series of them that catches up. Now, Connor made some really stupid mistakes. And in the FBI affidavit from a year ago when they picked him up, they mentioned, have I been pwned? And I don't really want to be in the affidavit. It doesn't sound like a great place to be, but the context was really interesting. So Pwned, this guy, is having a discussion with someone else called Omnipotent, who he's trading data with. He's trading data for a service called AI Type. It was an Android keyboard. And this guy here thinks that he hasn't received the correct data because it doesn't match up with what's in Have I Been Pwned. And he says in their chat, he says, Connor Fitzpatrick 02@gmail.com. So remember, he's anonymous at this stage, all right? He's Pwned. Is an email address he'd searched in Have I Been Pwned but was not able to locate in the stolen AI Type database. So he's going, hang on a second, Have I Been Pwned's got AI Type. I search for this email address and I get a hit. You just sent me a set of data. I searched that email address. It's not in there. They're not the same thing. And then he must have realised what he'd done because he says, in the discussion, he claimed that he did not want to share his actual email for obvious reasons, and he described connorfitzpatrick02@gmail.com as an email address that seems to have the same case. It's like, this isn't my address, but very coincidentally, it seems to have the same problem as the real one that's my address. Criminal masterminds, a lot of these guys. So this is how they keep getting caught over and over again. And this was just one of a series of different incidents, including things like dropping VPN and exposing his real source IP address into the logs of the forums. This is what breach forums looks like now. And again, it's like that logo, it's like the League of Nations, isn't it, that have taken down the site. Now, I've noticed something with the FBI I reckon the last year. And they seem to take a great deal of pleasure in creating these takedown notices. Now, you might be looking at this going, oh, it just looks like a normal takedown notice, until you realise that Pwned has a tiny set of handcuffs on. And that's exactly what happened. He got arrested, he got out on bail. He was in the news just last week for breaking his bail conditions. So his bail conditions said that he wasn't allowed to visit any hacking forums, he wasn't allowed to use a VPN, and he had to use monitoring software. And I'm not sure which one of those he broke, maybe all of them together, but he got picked up again. He is absolutely going away for a long time. Now, on the next sort of website that I never knew existed was this one. This popped up December. It was only last month. InflateVids. Anyone ever heard of InflateVids? Okay, we're all going to learn something today. So, this was the notice on their website. And I found it quite an interesting notice after it got taken down. I'll let you have a little read of that. I think what's interesting about it is they're like, there's no indication the attacker got access to the server itself, just all the data. Is that good then? I don't know. Maybe that's good. Anyway, the website is about balloons. So I went to Daily 3 and I asked for because this is in my brain. I was like, okay, it's a clown at like kids' parties. They're making like, you know, little puppies and things like this, but it's a hacker, and Daly went to town and gave me this. And when I was researching this breach, because every data breach I get as well, I've got to make sure it's legitimate. Because there's lots of people that pop up and they go, hey, I've got some, you know, sensational sounding thing. Here it is. And it's fabricated. It's not real. And I don't want to put that into Have I Been Pwned and indicate that a website has had a breach when they haven't had a breach. So I've got to verify them all. I've got to do a bit of research. And I learned that people that use this site were referred to as looners. So if you're a balloon fanatic, you're a looner. And then I kept reading, and they described what looners were. And then I was like, I had so many questions. But the site was offline as well. And most of the things that in my mind I thought it was were not actually correct. And I'm just going to let you use your own imaginations to try and figure out what's your natural association with balloons and that tagline. What it turns out to largely be is particularly like large inflatable animals that people blow up and then let down. And that's mostly it. Now, I can't see exactly because the website is still offline now, so I think we're about 6 weeks or something into it. But it's a little bit like the earlier example with the furries. This is a community of people. This is their thing. A whole bunch of people trusted the service with their data, and now it's been breached and it's floating around. This is the tweet from Have I Been Pwned. And the reason I put this here is one of the patterns that I see happen a lot, I've obviously quote tweeted their tweet, is they said, part of the hack included encrypted password hashes. You go, hang on. What was it? Was it encrypted? Was it hashed? Was it an encrypted hash? That would be unique. We don't normally see that. And of course, in the Have I Been Pwned explanation, I said, look, they're SHA-1 password hashes. And this might sound pedantic, but the reason it frustrates me a lot is websites will say, look, we've had a data breach, but don't worry, the passwords are encrypted. You should change your passwords. I'm like, well, which one is it? Like, if you're using modern encryption algorithms and you're doing it right, the question is, has the key been compromised? Because if the key's been compromised, then everything is immediately accessible. If it hasn't, then it's okay. If you're not sure, then that's a different thing again. But I'd say 99.9% of the time when we see a website say, we encrypted our passwords, they didn't, they hashed them. And then the question is, well, how did you hash them? If it's SHA-1, it's completely useless. So in cases like this, the working assumption is that every single password that was in there, I'll rephrase it, wouldn't be every single password, because if I made an account on that website and I use my password manager, I'd generate some 40-character crazy string and it's not being cracked, it's fine. But pretty much every normal person using that service is going to have a password which then gets cracked. So, massive difference there between encryption and hashing. Now, another interesting breach. This was probably my, I don't know if you can say I have a favourite breach, but I think this is my favourite breach of recent times. Now, you know how we have in English a very colloquial saying of I've got to go and buy some shit online before the birthday party. You know, I'm going to order some shit online for Christmas. What if you know where this is going, don't you? What if you could literally go and buy shit online? I told you, everything you can think of, and probably a whole bunch of stuff you can't think of, is online. Now, this is a real website, and it is still a real live running website today, Shit Express. A simple way to send a piece of shit in a box, not a bag, a box, because that would be weird, in a box around the world. Now, here's how it works. There's a 4-step process. Begins here. You choose your animal. Incidentally, if you don't believe it, go to shitexpress.com right now. It's a real thing. Choose your animal. Various animals have different types of excrement, different colours, smells, consistencies. Calm down, Scott. So you choose an animal. It's the first step. Second step is obviously you need an address because you're going to post it somewhere. We deliver packages to all countries in the world directly to the recipient. We use National Postal Service. Now, who here's been to Australia before? Have you tried to take a banana into Australia? Good luck. You're not posting shit to Australia in a box. And then every time I start looking at these data breaches, my mind just wanders. I was like, maybe they outsource. Maybe they've got subsidiaries in Australia and it's actually local and they can get away, I don't know. Anyway, then you pick a sticker. Plain, simple, non-telling. How about adding a big smiley face sticker to your shit? And then here's the kicker. Pay and stay anonymous. The service is 100% anonymous. Now, this is impressive because they could have said 90%. They could have said 99%, but no, it's 100% anonymous. We will never reveal your identity, even if you pay by credit card or PayPal. And as soon as you read that, you should be like, hang on a second. Have I ever tried creating an anonymous PayPal account? Like, how far do you get trying to do anything outside of cryptocurrency anonymously today? And even then, there's questions about anonymity. And just to make the point, if you do decide to pay by credit card, this is the payment page. Email address, card holder name, because it's a Stripe payment page. And that's fine. You can go and pay on Stripe. We use Stripe for Have I Been Pwned payment. It's a great service. But it is not anonymous. And by design, a lot of these services where they involve payment can't be anonymous because of all the KYC regulations now. So anyway, they had a data breach. Now, imagine all the data that needs to be collected in order to post shit is suddenly public. So it all gets leaked, and it made for fascinating reading, right? Because you have the logs of everyone who has sent shit and all of the messages that they're sending. And I took a screen cap of just part of it. There's a lot of words here. Now, can anyone here see the pattern with the names? You might need to be American. What's the pattern?
They're all senior politicians. Are they all on the Supreme Court?
They're all High Court judges. So someone has gone on a literal shit-posting rampage and sent boxes of shit to 6 different High Court judges. And the only reason I figured out is that when I saw the first name, Brett Kavanaugh, I'm Australian, America's on the other side of the world, but I watch the news, right? Because he was very, very much in the news a couple of years ago. And this person was very upset. And as you'll see, their IP address is logged next to that. And you'd imagine that if you're a High Court judge receiving a box of shit and getting upset, you would have a way of subpoenaing these records and probably mapping that IP address back to the individual. Some of the notes. Anyway, you look at the dates. Obviously, they've gone on a bit of a rampage one night. They've had a few wines and they've gone, you know what would be fun? Like, we're just going to send shit to High Court judges. The animals. Horses. Why would you always choose horse? So, earlier on, I said that, one of the fascinating things about data breaches is like peels back the covers. So you get to see behind the scenes, how does this thing actually work? Every single piece of shit sent by this service was from a horse. No pigs, no dogs, no anything else. Misrepresentation. But then I started thinking about it. I don't know how it is in your parts of the world, but you drive around, some of the farming areas in Australia, and the people literally put it out for free to fertilise your roses. Maybe it's just the best ROI. I don't know. So, we learn fascinating things from breaches after they happen. But, look, we're all sort of here, probably working for various companies to try and stop breaches from happening in the first place. And a lot of the way we're trying to do that is to try and stop having security vulnerabilities. A lot of these come from SQL injection vulnerabilities, databases without passwords, databases backed up and placed on the root of the website. It happens all the time. And for many of us, when we see a vulnerability that hasn't yet been exploited, we want to do the right thing and report it. Now, a lot of people reach out to me with vulnerabilities and they say, look, I've found something serious. I can't get any traction from the company. Can you help me get through to someone to let them know about their vulnerability? And I had one recently where the claim was pretty severe. I'm going to show you the claim in a moment. And they had tried very reasonable things to get in touch with the organisation, didn't get anywhere. So I said, all right, I'll tweet and ask for a security contact. Has anyone ever seen me tweet and ask for security? You don't want to be on that mail, right? You don't want to be there. You never want to see this from me. So, this was 3.5 years ago. And again, this is a last resort. This is after people have tried to get in touch via published email addresses. Do they have a security.txt file? Very often going through LinkedIn contacts. Scott's had a great one that we've just written about the last couple of days, where it's taken months to get in touch with an organisation for whom he could run any JavaScript he wanted on their website, and they just wouldn't reply. So here's what happened. Obviously, Grindr is a very sensitive sort of service. And this person's popped up and he said, I contacted you because I reported a serious security issue to one of the biggest gay dating websites, applications, Grindr, but the vendor keep ignoring me. I sent them all the technical details, but no way. The vulnerability allows an attacker to hijack any account. That would be really major on any application, let alone a website like Grindr. That would be a massive invasion of privacy. And this person had tried all of the contacts they possibly could to get in touch with the organisation. So we're sort of at the point where it's like, look, I put the tweet out. How are we going to ultimately demonstrate this problem so that when I get in touch with someone there, I can walk them through it? I want to walk them through the whole process. This is how the account takeover happens. And very often, what I've done in the past with this is written up a blog post that makes it an interesting read. And I only publish these things after they are well and truly fixed. But I needed to write up a blog post about how to take over an account. And in order to sort of demonstrate it as best I could, I needed someone else to have an account that I could take over. So I got in touch with Scott, and I thought maybe he could help. And he was very ingratiating, and he said, let me go and find my best dating profile website photo, and I'll set one up for you, and then so it's not misleading to anyone, we'll make it obvious it isn't a real site. Now, can anyone see how it's obvious it's not a real site? It's not a trick question. It literally says test account, a big test account. It was so obvious, because we don't want to mislead people. But we did want to go through this process of demonstrating the vulnerability. Now, here's how the vulnerability works. This thing is amazing. You go to the login page. Now, normally what happens on a login page is really one of three things. You can either log in, register, or reset your password. Now, what you do is you enter the email address and you go to the reset password link and it does this. So you do need to know the email address. Now, when you reset a password, and in fact, I'll rephrase this, because really we don't want to just reset people's passwords, because otherwise we have denial of service vectors. We want to initiate a password reset process. So normally what happens, you put the email address in, and then you get an email. Now, what do you normally get in the email? It's like some sort of a link, right? But there's some sort of whether it's a nonce or some cryptographic token or some massively random string, there's some sort of a secret in the email so that only the person who receives the email can click on that and then go and reset the password. What you don't want to do with that secret is put it in the response when you reset the password. And this is what Grindr were doing. And what it meant is you could take that string and you could put it in that URL and it would take you to that page. So long as you knew someone's email address, you could reset their password. So I created a new password for Scott and it said your password has been changed. How's that simple? What can you do once you change someone's password? You can now authenticate as them. So this is what Scott's Grindr homepage looked like. So I can't believe I'm saying that, sorry mate. But this is what his homepage looked like. This is his personal info. So not only can you read, but of course you can modify the personal info because you control the count. These are his DMs. Now, it was fascinating how many messages Scott got very, very quickly. I cannot show any of them here. But one of the things we learned is that it is a website with extraordinarily sensitive information messaging beyond what I expected, and I didn't know until we went through this process. Now, how Luke didn't see the big test account, like right there in the middle, I don't quite know. But this was the vulnerability, and they did fix it, and I can't even remember the reason why they said they didn't reply initially. But again, it's like the situation that Scott's been dealing with. If you don't know what I mean, is it on your tweet thread at the moment? Have a look at Scott_Helm for the tweet thread with Capelli Sport, where we got time. So this website had a dependency, a JavaScript dependency on, was it capellisport.info? So capellisport.com loads JavaScript from capellisport.info, which is a domain they let lapse some time ago. So he went and registered it, and then went, okay, cool, I got it. Now no one can do anything bad with it. I'll just let them know, and then I'll hand it over to them, and job done. But they didn't reply, like over and over and over again. And then he's trying all these channels. I think he tried people on LinkedIn as well. And then eventually he starts logging to the console a message, please get in touch with me. You know, like I control your domain. Can anyone get in touch? And that went on for ages as well. And it was only after we tweeted about it, I think like 2 days ago or something, that finally seems to be contact. But isn't it crazy? You can literally control someone's domain, control JavaScript, and then like what can you do with JavaScript? Well, just about anything. And it takes that much hard work just to report vulnerabilities. We often get to the point where we'll be talking about stuff like this and go, well, at least it's a good time to be in the industry, isn't it? I think that's the upside for all of us. Now, there's a lot of like low-hanging fruit and a lot of really simple vulnerabilities out there, but there's also some pretty cool sophisticated stuff, such as Genesis. Now, I mentioned before the FBI had sent me that little plaque after doing some work with them on the Genesis market takedown. And to be clear, the work that was done, as I mentioned earlier, after they took down this marketplace, which we'll show in a moment, they sent the email addresses and the passwords into Have I Been Pwned. When you authenticate to a service, you send your username and your password, it checks them out, hopefully they're fine, comes back, usually gives you some sort of authentication token, usually in a cookie, and then as you browse around the website, the cookie gets relayed and you remain authenticated across all requests. That's like Auth 101. It's very simple, very unsophisticated. If someone gets your cookies, you've got a problem. If there's XSS, if there's an insecure transport layer. Very often, what services will do is they'll also fingerprint the client. So they'll look at the browser. What are the unique defining attributes of the browser? Tie that to the cookie. If subsequent requests come in and the fingerprint doesn't match the cookie, you can reject the request. So we solve the session hijacking problem. Two-factor has gotten really popular. So you can have the right username and the right password, but if you don't have, whether it be something as simple as an SMS, soft token, hard token, whatever it might be, you don't get in. But what happens when you do successfully authenticate with two-factor? After that, you are authenticated, you've got your authentication token, you keep browsing the website. So if an attacker can get that authentication token, and if they can get the fingerprint of the browser and replicate all of that, they can bypass 2FA, so long as they get all of that data post-auth. So Genesis Market was a marketplace that ran both on the clear web and the dark web that did just that. It sold a combination of browser fingerprints and cookies. And it looked like this. I always find it fascinating. These shady marketplaces look like mainstream websites. If we pick the first one here, this is some poor individual whose machine has been compromised. They're currently logged onto Dropbox, Apple Store, Gumtree, Yahoo, so on and so forth. Normally, access to this person's browser fingerprint and their cookies would be sold for $59. It's on sale, $41.30, bargain. You get all the material required to hijack their session, which is kind of wild, isn't it? Now, once you get all that material, you've then got to somehow recreate it in your browser as well. So how can you now become that person? So one of the things that Genesis Market did is they had a handy browser extension. So you could run the browser extension in your browser, and then when you buy the stolen credential material and fingerprint, it could recreate all that using this extension, and you just browse around as if you were them. If anyone can remember Firesheep from years and years ago, it feels like that. They take care about your comfort. Very customer service orientated. And you know, this is again like one of the fascinating things where it's a clear web website running out there in the mainstream, and it runs with support services. It runs in a very customer-focused way. It's for the most part the same sort of experience you get if you bought normal shit online. Now, last year it didn't work out real well for the people behind that. A lot of them did end up getting arrested. In fact, there were, I think in the initial few days of the takedown, it's something like 120 arrests around the world in many, many different countries as well. And again, it was one of these sort of situations where it was like a league of nations taking down, arresting. A lot of arrests since then as well. Because imagine a forum like that where you not only are selling stolen data, but you're buying it and then reusing it as well. So think of how many buyers left their data on there. How many of them got their OPSEC spot on every single time and didn't leak something that would tie back to them, whether it be an IP address or an email, even a password. Reused passwords are a great way of getting some degree of confidence as the same person. And incidentally, if you're wondering, how do you get all that material? How do you get the browser fingerprint as well as the cookies? It's just malware. It's compromised machines. So if you've got the machine compromised and you can access everything from the browser fingerprint to the cookies, then you can obtain the material needed to do these account takeover attacks. This is what Genesis Market looks like now. Again, sort of the League of Nations there, and the Have I Been Pwned mention, which was really cool. So the data in the Have I Been Pwned also went into the Dutch police. I mentioned the Dutch police do a lot of these takedowns as well. So they have a check your hack service, runs a lot of the same sort of data. But the thing that I found the coolest about this, remember before I said with the Pom-Pom-Purium takedown, they had the little avatar, had the little handcuffs on. It said someone in the FBI is like living their best life. So they called the Genesis Market takedown, they called it Operation Cookie Monster because it was selling people's cookies. And some enterprising graphic designer at the FBI decided to create imagery with an FBI agent in a hoodie looking at the screen, and down next to the FBI agent, you had a tiny little half-eaten cookie. So I wanted to sort of end that on a little bit of a lighter note, because I think there are some fun sides to data breaches. There are a little bit of humour to them, as well as all the serious bits. But I also thought I'd leave a little bit of time today to do some Q&A. I've got a browser ready to go as well to do some impromptu stuff. We've got about 15 minutes left. Are there any questions? Oh, also, thank you.
So furries are well known for also, by and large, being techies. And there was a joke when Twitter started losing a lot of employees that it was going to go down because there were no furries left, and that's the death knell for a company. Were the passwords leaked from Fur Affinity encrypted with something better than SHA-1?
So there was an interesting prelogue there around furries being very often techie, and then a lot of them being from Twitter, and then if the furries leave Twitter, will Twitter still survive? I'd love to see what image I get from DALL-E 3 if I ask him to create that. But your question then was were the passwords encrypted?
Were they encrypted with something better than SHA-1, MD5? Was there a better standard of security from the Fur Affinity breach?
No. And just to be like really pedantic about it, they weren't encrypted at all. They were hashed from memory. But it's an easy mistake, right? And in fairness to the organisations that make these disclosures, when maybe furry is a bit different because, like you say, they're more techie. But let's say it was like Dropbox, and you're speaking to the vast sort of general community. If you say like to my mum and dad, "Hey, we decrypted your passwords with a hashing algorithm," they'll be like, "What?" Now, mind you, if they say we encrypted them, they'll go, "Oh, that's really good." I don't think they'd really know the difference, but it's something that we're more familiar with. No, from memory, it was still a SHA variant, so no, it wasn't like adaptive hashing algorithms and all the good stuff, which sucks. Tanya?
What will the future bring for Have I Been Pwned? Do you have like any big plans?
So Tanya's question is, what will the future bring for Have I Been Pwned? I joke about this a little bit, but honestly, a large amount of the truth is it's very much day by day. So we just never know from day to day what's going to happen. And when I say we, it's like Charlotte and I, and Stefan's here as well, who works part-time and Have I Been Pwned. It's literally the three of us doing it in between things like this. I get up each day and I look at my emails, and like some of the breaches you just seen, I'll be like, well, I didn't see that coming, and it will just come out of the blue. And it's very responsive that way. In terms of bigger plans, I think the main thing is, and particularly being a decade in, I think about making myself redundant. Because at the moment, like everyone knows stuff in Australia is going to, you're from Norway, your front pages are always full of stuff in Australia that's going to kill you, right? So I go out there and I get bitten by a snake and eaten by a shark while I'm wakeboarding or something. You know, what happens? Well, the service keeps running because it's all sitting up there on the cloud, but no more data gets loaded. Because the data normally comes to me because people trust me to do the right thing with it. So we've got to try and like break out of that mold to be more sustainable, but I also don't want to go down a road where it's like, let's just hire, lots of people. That just feels like it would sap my soul. And that the joy that we have with Have I Been Pwned at the moment is we can run it with our sort of moral compass, and we can run it on our schedule, and we can, do stuff like this and live our life the way we do. So I'm sorry, that's probably not a very good answer, but we're winging it to a degree. Yeah. Yeah, so passkeys. Who's using passkeys anyway? I'm going to call like 15% of the audience. I think passkeys are a really good step in that passwordless future direction. I fear a little bit that we've added one other confusing construct in there. Like I keep using my mum and dad as an example because they're not techie, but it's like I've tried really hard to get them into 2FA. They have one password, they use the OTP generator, but if I then go, there's also passkeys. How do passkeys work? Well, they're not physical, no. Well, they're software, yes, but you have to store them somewhere and you have to synchronize them. I think they're a good step in that right direction. I just wonder how they're going to fit in with all the other password constructs we still have. I guess for us as techies, where we understand the different types of constructs we have is good. I like passkeys for things that I need to be able to easily authenticate to, but if I want a high degree of auth, then I'd much rather use my physical security key. But particularly now while I'm traveling, it's like, where'd I put that key? Oh, it's in my bag in the other room. So it's a trade-off though, isn't it? Let's do one from the back, yeah.
Thank you for a great talk. Can you say if you thought about using Have I Been Pwned for biometric data, and interested to hear how you think generative
All right, cool. So the question is, have I thought about using Have I Been Pwned for biometric data, and then how's generative AI going to change things? There are data breaches in Have I Been Pwned where biometric data has been exposed. Philippines Election Commission is one example that comes to mind. Now, of course, I don't put that data in there, and I'm not sure what I'd do with it if I did. I mean, biometrics is interesting because there's the question of what is actually leaked. Can that be replayed anyway? Does it actually create a vulnerability? We're not storing fingerprints per se, and even if we were, what way could we then reproduce them into something that was usable to authenticate to a service? So I honestly don't see a place to store biometric data in Have I Been Pwned, but to extend that further, Have I Been Pwned doesn't store your date of birth. It doesn't store your home address. It doesn't store any of that. I don't think it needs to be stored because it's still just there to answer that question. Have I been pwned? Am I in a data breach? What I do is for any breach that contains something like biometric data, there's metadata that says, date of birth, email address, password, biometric data. And then I explain in the description. The AI bit, I think, is interesting because the discussion comes up a lot. It seems to go both ways. Like, can we use AI to better defend things? And then can we use AI to better break things? Like, how many messages do you get? How many phishing messages do you get? And you go, I know that's a fish straight away because it reads like crap. It's like when they discover AI, like we're screwed, we've got a problem. I think as it relates to Have I Been Pwned, I don't see a direct link there. Will there be more AI used in order to compromise systems and then expose data which then ends up in Have I Been Pwned? I think that's probably the connection that we'll see. Next question. Yeah. Yeah, good question. So have I had any success getting less techie people to adopt password managers? The hard ask is organisations, websites are trying to reduce the friction on people. So a good example is sometimes people say, let's say 23andMe. Has everyone seen 23andMe in the news lately? So they got credential stuffing attack, took advantage of reused passwords. Attackers got in to a limited set of accounts, but then by nature of 23andMe connecting you with other people, those accounts then exposed the other personal data of other accounts, and the whole thing became a big mess. And people would say, well, 23andMe should just force everyone to use 2FA. But what do you think would happen if a service like that forced everyone? You'd lose customers. Like it'd be a nightmare. And every time we see stats from mainstream websites about 2FA adoption, it's usually like single-digit percentage adoption rates. Let's say a few years ago, Dropbox said their adoption rate was about 2%, or somewhere like that. And that's storing what is often very personal, sensitive data. So we've got these really low adoption rates of security constructs that are there to help people, in part because of the friction. So a password manager for someone who's never used one before is friction. Like if you've never used a password manager before, it is a pain to get used to. How many people have tried getting their parents or relations or friends onto a password manager? Keep your hand up if it was fun. All right, it's not a fun thing. And it's for those of us that are drinking the Kool-Aid and in that ecosystem, we're like, but password managers are awesome because all my passwords are unique and it's actually faster to log in because I just like Face ID and it fills it all in and I jump straight in. So I think that we need to try and help people move in that direction, but it's friction and that's what holds us back. Now maybe passkeys will help move us in that direction, but then we've still got to synchronize passkeys. So I synchronize a lot of my passkeys via 1Password, like the 1Password password manager app. But then other people might be synchronizing them via other means. But then that won't necessarily be on every device. And we're in this kind of kludgy ecosystem again. So look, the way I do it is I try and help those around me to use a password manager now. I think that's the best possible answer we have until we get into something that's a little more easy for everyone to grasp. Yeah?
How do you feel about storing 2FA inside of your password manager?
Oh, that's a good question. How do I feel about storing the 2FA OTPs in my password manager? So, soft tokens. We've had the likes of Google Authenticator, we've had the likes of Authy. We can store the tokens in there such that after you enter the username and password, you pull out your phone, you pull out the token, you enter it in before the counter ends up, and you're fine. A lot of people then argue, they say, well, that's not 2FA because you've sort of got everything in one place. You know, you've got a soft token. It's not necessarily something you have because you can replicate it. And if you don't replicate it, how many people have got friends? Friends who've been using like Google Authenticator, and then they get a new phone, and they've lost all their OTPs, and now they can't get back in. The value proposition of doing it in a password manager is that for something like 1Password, it'll synchronize. So you put your OTPs in there, it'll synchronize across all your devices. So from a usability perspective, it's awesome because I can go from my PC to my phone to my iPad, and I can log on to everything, and I have both the username and the password, but I also have the OTP. But then people say, well, what if your password manager gets compromised? Usually the answer to that is you're pretty screwed, right? Like, I hear this all the time. People go, oh, what's this password manager thing? Isn't it just putting all your eggs in one basket? So yeah, like that is literally what it is. And then the discussion is how well is that basket protected? We know the impact. If it's not protected, it's severe. But a password manager that's set up well, the likelihood of it happening is extremely small. Now that said, I think that there's different mechanisms that are suitable for different use cases. So let's say, we'll pick GitHub as an example. I've got a lot of sensitive stuff in GitHub. I'd much rather authenticate with a security key. And sometimes that's hard. You know, I am out and about and I'm trying to log in with my phone and I don't have my security key. But then no one else can log in either with that security key. But then for something like, I'll give you a good example. I use Zendesk for Have I Been Pwned support. Every single day, it asks me to re-authenticate with the OTP. And I'd much rather just fill that in out of 1Password because the impact of that is so much lower if it gets compromised, and the usability side of it is so much higher because of how frequently it prompts me. So I don't think there's one true answer. I think you've got to understand the pros and cons of each and figure it out side by side. Yeah.
Not a question, it's a comment. So I think we have to blame, we often complain about that encrypted passwords and hash passwords are different. We have to blame Unix and POSIX for that. Because the Libc function to hash a password is called crypt.
Okay, so for those who couldn't hear, he's blaming Unix for all the password problems. Let's just leave it at that. All right, probably got time for a couple more. Wow. Yes?
Is ever-in-pwned actively targeted? And if yes, what are you doing to ensure that if it is breached, you won't add more harm?
Oh, okay, that's a very good meta question. What if Have I Been Pwned gets pwned? So the beginning of the question was, is Have I Been Pwned actively targeted? It's on the internet, so yes. Like that's basically the criteria. I see a lot of different attacks against Have I Been Pwned. What am I doing? I put it behind Cloudflare probably around 6 or 7 years ago. And Cloudflare has been really, really awesome for not just controlling attacks against the service, but also doing a massive amount of caching and things like that for various services there. So Cloudflare blocks a huge amount of it, which is great. The application itself is now a bit of a hybrid of Azure App Service, Azure Functions, Cloudflare Workers. I try to do all the things in there that we teach in the workshops, you know, not to have SQL injection and so on. But there are a few other things that I think are really important here, and one of them is the only piece of data that goes into Have I Been Pwned after a data breach is the email address. Now, I don't want to have a breach of Have I Been Pwned and have nearly 13 billion records. That would be a big one. I'd have a lot of notifications to send. I don't know how I'd send that many emails. I don't want that to happen, but if it does, by virtue of only having email addresses, the scope or the impact is limited to the re-exposure of addresses that have already been exposed. And I really like that mandate of you cannot lose what you do not have, because if I don't store it, I can't lose it. I think probably what would be more impactful is that everyone who signs up for domain searches and notifications, everyone who signs up to be notified if their own email address appears in a breach, there's nearly 5 million people that do that, their email addresses would be breached when they might not have been breached in that context before. So, yeah, that's what we do, sort of a combination of technical controls and just simple data minimization. And hopefully that means if ever there is a problem, it's as minimal as it should be. Okay, folks, I think we're at time now. Thanks very much for coming along, and I'll be back around later on if people want beers. And I've got a big heap of stickers and 3D printed logos if you want to come and grab some as well. Thanks very much.